You know, um, Usually when we talk about a crisis, I think we tend to imagine something explosive, like a sudden impact.
So right, like a literal crash.
Exactly. You're driving down the highway at, I don't know, 70 miles an hour, and a tire blows out. And instantly you know exactly what the problem is.
It's undeniable. The steering wheel jerks, the car shudders.
Yeah, the damage is completely visible, it's undeniably urgent. And the solution, while maybe it's expensive or, super inconvenient, it's totally straightforward. You pull over and you fix the tire. It's an acute event.
And human beings, well, generally speaking anyway, we are incredibly well adapted to recognizing and responding to acute events like that.
We have adrenaline for exactly that reason, right?
Exactly. We see the fire, we put out the fire, we see the blowout, we change the tire. It's cause and effect.
Right. It's clean in its own chaotic, adrenaline-fueled way, but then you look at human relationships.
Yeah.
Or communities. Or even these massive centuries-old institutions.
Where things are a lot less clean.
Oh, totally. The real crises in those spaces, the ones that actually destroy things from the inside out, they rarely look like a blowout. They look like a slow, imperceptible leak, a drift.
Yeah, drift is a great way to put it.
You wake up one day, you look around at your community or your organization or even just your own personal life, and you realize you are miles and miles away from where you started.
And the terrifying part is you have absolutely no idea how you got there.
Exactly. It's completely murky. You're just adrift.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. Because when a slow leak is happening, I mean, on paper, everything might still look perfectly fine.
Right. The check engine light isn't on.
No, it's not. The structure is there, the walls are standing, the meetings are scheduled. But the substance, the actual lifeblood of the thing, it's completely evaporated. You essentially just have a husk.
And that profound, deeply unsettling phenomenon is exactly what we are plunging into today. So welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad you are here with us.
It's going to be a really fascinating one.
It really is. Today, our mission is to explore this massive stack of material we've been reviewing. It's a bunch of incredibly detailed analysis alongside these intricate historical and theological infographics.
And it's all centered around one specific, really profound concept articulated by Chris Arvelasis.
Yes, the concept of the renewal of covenant identity. And I want to set the stakes right out of the gate for you listening, because this is vital.
It's not just theory.
No, not at all. This isn't just an abstract theological history lesson. This is a forensic exploration of what happens when people or communities completely lose their way.
And why just trying harder doesn't work.
Exactly. Why memorizing more historical facts or, I don't know, implementing some new 10-step corporate productivity program completely fails to fix the core issue.
That framing is absolutely crucial. Because what this analysis suggests is that when a community drifts, when they have that slow, fatal leak we just talked about, they don't just need a new set of instructions.
They don't need a new employee handbook.
Right. They don't just need better management or a comforting pat on the back. They are suffering from a much deeper amnesia. They need to remember a foundational reality.
Which is what, exactly?
They need to remember who they are, whose they are, and why they exist in the very first place. The entire premise we're looking at today rests on this one unshakable rule. Identity precedes action. Always.
Identity precedes action.
Wow. If you forget your identity, your actions lose their anchor. And literally no amount of frantic paddling will keep you from drifting out to sea.
Okay, let's unpack this idea of drift, because the material paints a really stark, honestly almost haunting picture of what this actually looks like on the ground.
It's terrifyingly subtle.
It is. Before we can even talk about the mechanics of how to renew an identity, we have to deeply understand the crisis of losing it. The analysis warns us that when the so-called covenant identity weakens, everything just begins to drift.
And it impacts every level of a community.
Yeah, it uses very specific language here. It says worship or communal gathering becomes formal or thin. Obedience becomes highly selective.
Meaning you only obey the rules that are convenient for you.
Exactly. Leadership turns self-protective and paranoid, and the overall mission of the group just becomes totally confused.
The scariest part to me is the assertion about the language.
Yes. The assertion that a people can completely lose their identity, the actual core of who they are, yet still fluently speak all the right religious or institutional language. They suffer a total loss of what Velasis terms spiritual coherence.
That phrase, spiritual coherence, is incredibly evocative. I mean, think about what coherence means in physics, like with light.
Like a laser.
Exactly like a laser. It implies that all the waves or all the pieces of a thing are moving together, holding together logically to create a unified force.
Okay, I followed that.
When you lose covenant identity, you lose coherence. The pieces might still be sitting on the table. The community might still gather on the right day of the week. They might still say the exact right words.
Sing the traditional song.
Right, and perform the expected rituals flawlessly.
Yeah.
But the animating life force, the actual lived reality of belonging to God and to one another, is just gone. It becomes a hollow shell.
And here is the true danger, right? Because the vocabulary and the architecture remain intact, the people inside that shell often don't even realize it's completely hollow.
Until a major storm hits.
Right. And then the whole thing shatters overnight, and everyone is left wondering how a seemingly healthy structure collapsed so incredibly fast.
It makes me think of, well, a couple who are legally married, but entirely disconnected.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy. Let's dig into that. They have the marriage certificate filed securely at the county courthouse. They live in the exact same house.
They share a joint bank account. They divide up the chores.
Yeah, they might even still buy each other those standard issue anniversary cards because, well, that's what you do on the date that's circled on the calendar.
But functionally, emotionally, fundamentally, they're just distant roommates.
Exactly. They pass each other in the kitchen. They manage the logistics of the household. But the formal language and the paperwork are masking a total void.
The core reality, the intimacy, the mutual sacrifice has completely drifted away.
They're flawlessly performing the structure of a marriage without containing any of the substance of one.
It's a tragic but very common reality.
So let me challenge this a bit based on what we're reading here. Is it really possible for entire communities, like hundreds or maybe thousands of people, to collectively do all the right things, to maintain all the outward metrics of success, but completely miss the point?
You're asking if you can have the structure perfectly in place and still be entirely adrift.
Yeah. Is that actually possible on a large scale?
It's not just possible. Historically speaking, it's the default human trajectory. And the material we are reviewing explicitly addresses that exact tension.
Okay, lay it on me.
What's fascinating here is this crucial phrase that acts as the absolute linchpin for this whole concept. The text says, belonging before behavior, but not belonging without behavior.
Belonging before behavior, but not belonging without behavior. That's a bit of a riddle.
It is, but it's a profound paradigm-shifting dynamic. When we talk about covenant identity, we're talking about a framework where God has already committed himself. The divine actor has moved first.
So the foundation is already poured, so to speak.
Exactly. Therefore, when a community recommits itself, when it tries to fix that distant roommate marriage dynamic we just talked about, it isn't about humans desperately trying to seek divine approval through improved, rigorous behavior.
It's not about trying to earn the love back.
No, it is divine faithfulness awakening human repentance.
But wait, if God has already moved first, if the belonging's already secure, regardless of what we do, isn't that incredibly dangerous?
How do you mean?
Well, doesn't that just give people a massive license to do whatever they want? Like, if behavior is just a secondary response, why wouldn't a community just say, great, we belong, we're good, we don't have to change anything?
Because that fundamentally misunderstands the psychological and spiritual mechanism of grace.
Okay, unpack that mechanism for me.
Grace, in this covenantal framework, creates an unbreakable obligation. But it's an obligation of love, not of terror. Let's go back to your roommate couple trying to fix their marriage.
The ones passing in the kitchen.
Right. If they wake up and say, okay, our marriage is failing, we need to schedule mandatory conversation time for exactly 30 minutes every Tuesday, and we must exchange 3 compliments a day, what are they actually doing?
They're just adding more exhausting behavior to a hollow structure.
Exactly. It feels forced, it's transactional, and it's incredibly brittle.
Yeah, I'd hate to be in that marriage.
But imagine if, instead of adding arbitrary rules, they somehow genuinely remembered why they fell in love in the first place.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
If they vividly recalled the vows they made, the depth of the bond they once shared, the sacrifices the other person made for them over the years.
That memory inherently awakens a natural, irrepressible desire to actually spend time together.
Precisely. The behavior, the conversation, the compliments, it all flows organically from the renewed realization of their identity as lovers, not roommates.
That makes so much sense.
In this framework, recommitment is never human initiative trying to earn a wage. It's an awakening to a reality that is already true. God has bound himself to his people. When that reality truly penetrates the collective psyche of a community, It produces holiness and obedience organically.
So you don't have to force the behavior if the identity is secure.
You really don't.
I want you, the listener, to really sit with this for a second. Consider your own life. Consider your own communities, maybe your workplace, your family, or your local congregation.
Have you ever felt that specific, quiet kind of drift?
Yeah, where the motions remain, the calendar appointments are meticulously met, the right cultural buzzwords are used in every single meeting, but the underlying meaning is just utterly, completely gone.
It's a deeply unsettling, haunting feeling when you finally notice it.
And what we were uncovering here is that the solution isn't to just paddle harder. You can't outrow a lack of identity. You have to stop and figure out what ocean you're actually in.
And to figure that out, you have to define the waters. You literally cannot renew an identity if you don't rigorously understand what that identity is supposed to be in the first place.
Precisely. If losing this identity causes such a massive structural collapse, we need to rigorously, clearly define what covenant identity actually means in this specific context.
It's clearly not just a vague, warm feeling of togetherness.
No, the analysis lays out a very specific architecture, 6 core principles. And rather than just listing off points like a textbook, let's explore how these foundational principles actually interact.
Because they really challenge almost everything modern culture tells us about who we are.
They really do. The very first premise is that identity is relational first. It begins entirely with belonging to God.
The core declaration being, I will be your God, and you shall be my people.
Right. It doesn't start with a task or a job description or some moral checklist. It starts with a relationship.
Which is a radical, almost incomprehensible departure from how we normally think about identity today. I mean, we think of identity as something we forge through our careers.
Or our achievements, or even just our internal feelings.
Exactly. But this framework insists identity is something you receive from outside yourself.
And that flows right into the next crucial dynamic. This identity is historical and remembered.
This is a huge one. It insists that actively remembering God's past acts is the primary mechanism that keeps a people faithful.
And forgetting isn't just a cognitive slip, right? The text says forgetting leads directly to apostasy.
Yes, forgetting is fatal.
Okay, let's pause there because apostasy is a heavy, loaded term. For someone listening who hasn't spent time in a theology seminar, what does apostasy actually mean in this context? Because it sounds like it just means changing your mind about a religion.
That's a really great clarification to make. Apostasy in the context of covenant identity isn't just checking a different box on a census form or casually deciding you don't agree with a specific doctrine anymore.
So what is it?
It is a complete and total structural collapse of foundational reality. It's the severing of the vital relational cord.
Wow.
Think about it. If your identity is entirely based on the historical fact that God rescued you, then forgetting that history means you literally no longer know who you are.
You become an amnesiac.
Exactly. You wander off into the wilderness because you forgot you have a home. Apostasy is the tragic result of communal amnesia. Identity isn't generated in the spontaneous present moment. It's deeply anchored in a shared, remembered, historical reality.
And that leads to this fascinating tension in the material between two concepts, the gift and the summons. That's the third
The
principle.
gift and the summons is a beautiful paradox.
You were chosen by grace. That's the gift part, the unearned belonging. But you are simultaneously called to intense holiness and service. That's the summons. You absolutely do not get one without the other.
Which brings up another massive cultural clash. And the fourth principle, this identity is radically communal.
Oh, the analysis is incredibly pointed here. It argues that true identity is lived out in a physical body, a family, a nation, a specific people group.
It completely rejects the modern Western ideal of the isolated, hyper-individualized spiritual journey.
Yeah, the whole it's just me and God in the woods mentality.
It completely dismantles that Western ideal. You cannot be a covenant person in isolation any more than you can be a husband without a spouse.
The identity only exists in the context of the shared community.
And furthermore, moving to the fifth principle, the material stresses that this community is reformed by word and spirit.
What does that mean practically when a community is drifting?
It means true renewal only happens when external truth breaks in and reshapes them. It is never merely a psychological uplift.
So it isn't just a charismatic leader hyping everyone up into a manufactured emotional high.
No, it requires an encounter with objective external revelation.
And all of this is pointing somewhere, which is the sixth and final dimension. This identity is future-oriented. The community lives in the hope of the fullness of their identity, which will only be fully revealed later. The material describes this as being eschatological.
Right. And to unpack that term eschatological, it simply refers to the ultimate destination, the final culminating chapter of history.
Right, but I have to ask, what does eschatological hope actually mean for someone sitting in traffic on a Tuesday afternoon, stressed about their mortgage? How does a $5 seminary word change their reality?
That's the perfect question. It changes everything about how they process their present anxiety.
How so?
If your identity is eschatological, it means your current circumstances, your stressful job, your financial struggles, even the geopolitical chaos you see on the news, they do not have the final word on who you are.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Your ultimate identity and security are locked in the future, guaranteed by God, waiting to be fully unveiled. It means you can endure the traffic, the stress, and the suffering of the present, because you know this is not the end of the story. Your identity is tethered to an unshakable future, not your fragile present.
That is an incredibly liberating perspective. Actually, let's dig deeper into that idea of liberation, specifically regarding that first premise we talked about, that identity is received, not invented.
It's a huge contrast to our culture today.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I want to contrast this deeply with our current cultural moment. Think about how completely exhausted we all are by the endless, crushing demand to constantly curate a personal brand.
Oh, it's relentless.
From the moment you are a teenager, you are told you have to define yourself, you have to market yourself, you have to constantly update your digital avatar on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on whatever platform to reflect your authentic self, whatever that even means, on any given Tuesday.
It is a 247 job just to maintain the architecture of your own existence.
Exactly. But this framework actually calls belonging to God liberating, specifically because it delivers us from the absolute tyranny of self-definition. It frees us from the crushing weight of public opinion. You don't have to build your identity from scratch with your bare hands. You just have to receive it.
It's profoundly exhausting to be your own creator.
It really is.
If you are solely responsible for defining and maintaining your own identity, then your identity is only ever as secure as your very latest achievement, or your current emotional mood, or how many people validated you on the internet that morning.
Which is a terrifyingly fragile, shifting foundation.
What's being highlighted here is that true covenant identity is infinitely secure, precisely because it rests entirely on God's eternal declaration, not our frantic curation.
You are known by the one who made you, period.
That single fact, if internalized, completely removes the performance anxiety that characterizes almost every waking moment of modern life.
But then, we hit that tension again, the gift and the summons. Because if I just receive this identity, my natural instinct is to say, awesome, I'm chosen, I'm secure, I'm going to take a nap.
Right, the temptation of complacency.
It challenges this insidious idea that being chosen means you get to just sit back, relax, and enjoy the VIP lounge of the universe.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that is where the visual mapping in these sources is so brilliant. It illustrates a direct, unbreakable line between the aspects of the gift, being chosen, redeemed, and forgiven purely by grace, and the aspects of the summons.
The calling, empowering, and sending.
Yes, being actively sent out. In this biblical framework, election is never, ever about elitism. It is not about being handed a golden ticket to a private club where you get to look down on everyone else who didn't make the cut.
So what is it about?
To be chosen is to be drafted. You are drafted into service. You are redeemed specifically so that you can be sent out to bless the nations, to heal the brokenness of the world.
Grace is the powerful engine, but mission is the vehicle.
They are one and the same motion.
Which perfectly sets us up to examine how this massive engine actually runs over the course of human history. Because these concepts, the relational beginning, the communal nature, the gift, and the summons, they aren't just abstract philosophical ideas floating in a vacuum.
They are the actual driving force behind a massive, epic storyline.
The analysis we are looking at traces how this covenant identity is established, tested, completely shattered, and ultimately restored over millennia. It's the grand biblical narrative, and it operates like a massive heartbeat.
And it's critical to understand this narrative heartbeat,
Mm-hmm.
because the argument here is that you literally cannot understand your present identity without knowing this historical trajectory.
You have to know the story you are in.
Exactly. And it starts remarkably before time even exists.
Right. It begins from eternity to creation. The assertion is that human identity begins in God's eternal purpose before the universe was even formed.
We were made with a very specific intent.
Humanity is purposefully made for resemblance to image, God for stewardship of the earth, and for worship. We were meticulously designed to live under the loving definition of our Creator.
But then, obviously, the narrative hits a catastrophic wall.
The fall. We enter the period from the fall to the covenant. And what fascinates me here is how this material frames the tragedy of Genesis 3.
How so?
It doesn't frame it just as humans breaking an arbitrary rule about eating fruit. It frames the fall fundamentally as a massive identity crisis. The serpent's core temptation wasn't about being bad. The temptation was, you will be like God. It was the temptation of absolute autonomous self-definition.
The primal rupture of humanity is the lie of autonomous identity. The moment we believed the lie that we could be our own creators, our own moral arbiters, we shattered our integrity.
We tried to invent ourselves apart from the source of our existence.
It's like a light bulb deciding it doesn't need the power grid to shine. It just unplugs itself and plunges into darkness.
That's a great image. But the incredible turn in the narrative is that God doesn't just abandon the project. He doesn't throw the broken bulb away.
No, he initiates a rescue.
He answers this deeply fractured, autonomous human identity with a startling promise to one man, Abraham. He says, I will make a people out of you, and I will use this specific people to bless all the nations of the earth.
Which immediately establishes that dynamic of election and mission we just discussed.
Right. Abraham isn't chosen so he can boast. He's chosen so he can be a conduit of restoration to a broken world.
And we see that conduit formalized as we move into the next era, from redemption to the kingdom.
Let's fast forward to Israel standing at Mount Sinai in Exodus 19. God has just miraculously rescued them from slavery in Egypt, and he explicitly calls them a kingdom of priests and a holy nation.
That phrase is so important.
I want to linger on it for a second. Kingdom of priests. Sociologically, that is fascinating. What does that actually mean? A priest is an intermediary. A priest represents God to the people, and the people to God.
So it's not just a religious title.
No. So to call an entire nation a kingdom of priests means their entire national identity, their agriculture, their justice system, their family life was supposed to be a living, breathing display of God's character to the surrounding nations.
It wasn't just a privileged status, it was a grueling, beautiful vocation.
And then shortly after, in Deuteronomy 6, we get the Shema, which places the love of God with all your heart, soul, and strength at the absolute center of their daily rhythm. It was the ultimate guardrail against drift.
But human nature being what it is, the guardrails fail.
They fail spectacularly. We enter the darkest period, from kingdom to exile. And the mechanics of this failure are deeply, deeply relevant to us today. Disobedience leads to rampant idolatry.
But the analysis points out something profound about that idolatry.
Yeah, it was actually their power and their prosperity that distorted their memory. They started trusting in the external structures, the massive, beautiful temple, the intricate daily rituals, the political power of the monarchy, while completely and utterly ignoring the covenant relationship itself.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the roommate marriage.
Oh, wow, you're right. It scales up perfectly.
The structure was magnificent. The temple was a wonder of the ancient world. The rituals were incredibly precise. But the substance had completely drifted.
They were performing the paperwork of the covenant, but their hearts were miles away, worshiping power, wealth, and the surrounding cultural gods.
Yes. And the drift gets so bad that cancer goes so deep that it leads to the total collapse of the nation, the exile.
Now, here's a phrase from the material that stopped me in my tracks, and I want us to debate this a bit.
Let's hear it.
The document refers to the exile, the brutal, violent loss of their land, the catastrophic destruction of their holy temple, their forced, humiliating deportation to the superpower of Babylon. It refers to this as a severe mercy.
That is a tough phrase to swallow.
It really is. It argues that this severe mercy was necessary to strip away their false identity. It specifically points to figures like Daniel, who maintained his identity under intense pressure in a foreign land. But I have to push back here.
Please do.
Put yourself in the shoes of an Israelite who just watched Jerusalem burn. How in the world can the destruction of your home, the loss of your freedom, and the annihilation of everything you hold sacred possibly be categorized as a mercy?
It's a deeply jarring, almost offensive phrase, isn't it? Severe mercy. It feels like a total contradiction.
Totally.
But it forces us to look at the absolute core of how human identity works and how easily we deceive ourselves. Think deeply about what Israel had done over the centuries leading up to the exile.
They got comfortable.
Worse than comfortable. They had slowly, imperceptibly begun to conflate their relationship with God with their own political dominance and economic success. Their internal logic had become, We possess the temple. We have a king on the throne. We control this land. Therefore, we are undeniably God's people, and God will never let anything bad happen to us.
So their spiritual identity had become hopelessly, toxically entangled with their geopolitical circumstances.
Exactly. They were wearing the team uniform, playing in their home stadium, but they had completely forgotten how to actually play the game. They thought the uniform was the power.
They worshipped the uniform.
Precisely. They worshiped the uniform. So you have to ask, what happens when the uniform is violently ripped away? What happens when the external safety nets, the political power, the economic prosperity, the literal physical stones of the temple are burned to the ground by an invading army?
It forces an immediate existential crisis of identity.
Yes. If you genuinely believe you are only God's people because you live in a specific geography and have a specific political system, who in the world are you when you are suddenly powerless slaves in Babylon?
You're nobody.
The mercy of the exile, as severe and brutal as it undeniably was that it completely obliterated the false idols they had wrapped their identity in. It burned away the chaff.
It forced them to realize what actually mattered.
It forced the surviving remnant, people like Daniel, to realize that if their covenant identity was going to survive, it had to be rooted in God himself, not in their political dominance or cultural comfort.
When you strip away every single external prop, you find out very quickly what the foundation is actually made of.
That is a staggering thought, but it's true. So the suffering and the displacement actually clarified and purified the identity.
Daniel was able to pray differently, to live faithfully, and to resist the assimilation of the Babylonian Empire, specifically because his identity was no longer tied to a zip code in Jerusalem.
It was tied directly to the covenant God. He had an internal anchor that Babylon couldn't touch.
Exactly. The exile cured them of the illusion that God was just a national mascot.
Yeah.
And the narrative arc continues from that purified remnant toward the ultimate restoration in the Messiah.
The theological claim here is that Jesus steps into history and succeeds in every single place where Adam and the nation of Israel failed.
He refuses the temptation of autonomy.
He is the flawless, perfect covenant keeper. And he establishes the new covenant, sealed in his own blood, which we see in the accounts of the Last Supper in Luke 22.
And finally, the arc sweeps from the church to eternity. We see a new, spirit-formed people violently breaking ethnic boundaries, drawn from every nation on earth, moving inexorably toward the new creation where, as the book of Revelation describes, God will physically dwell with his people forever.
The grand cosmic arc is complete.
It really is a breathtaking, sweeping vision, moving from a fractured, autonomous identity hiding in a garden all the way to a perfected, unbreakable, multi-ethnic communion in a renewed city. But here is where we need to bring it down to earth.
Because we still have to live in the present.
Exactly. That narrative is beautiful, but the pivot point in that history, the actual historical moment of return and rebuilding after the exile, provides us with a very practical, granular blueprint for how renewal actually happens in real time.
Yes. The grand narrative gives us the why, but the historical account of the return gives us the crucial how.
And that is exactly where we are going. Because we've seen that exile, whether it's a literal historical exile or a metaphorical spiritual exile in our own lives, can lead to restoration. But how does a community practically execute a return? How do they actually recommit when they realize they've drifted?
It's not a mystery. There's a blueprint.
The analysis we're using maps out a remarkably specific, step-by-step historical model drawn straight from the book of Nehemiah, chapters 8 through 10. Let's look closely at how this happens because it's not what modern logic would expect.
To set the scene, the Israelites have returned from Babylon. Nehemiah has led them in physically rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem.
So they're finally safe from external physical threats.
Right, but they realize that physical safety is not the same thing as spiritual renewal. So they gather together, and the very first thing they do is ask for the book of the law to be brought out. This is the first crucial phase, hearing the word.
So they just sit and listen.
The historical account says the law is read clearly and publicly to the entire assembly from daybreak until noon.
Wait, from daybreak until noon? That's hours of just listening.
Yes. This is vital because it shows that renewal starts with the introduction of external objective truth, not with someone trying to manufacture an internal feeling.
And the immediate reaction to hearing that truth is the second phase, feeling the need. The text says that upon hearing the law read, the entire crowd begins to weep.
They are completely undone.
They are collectively struck by the vast canyon between God's standard and their actual lived reality. They deeply, viscerally recognize how far they have drifted. They face the unvarnished reality of their sin.
But, and I want to emphasize this, they don't just wallow in blind emotion.
Right, because the third phase is understanding the truth. The text notes that the Levites, the teachers, actually move through the crowd explaining the law, breaking it down, translating it so that people truly grasp its meaning.
That is such a vital mechanism. Weeping is a powerful emotion, but emotion without comprehension
It
evaporates.
just fades away.
The leaders made sure the people intellectually understood exactly what they were weeping about. It required deep cognitive engagement, not just a mystical or emotional experience.
Once that understanding is locked in, the community moves to the fourth phase, confessing the sin. And this is sharply countercultural for us today.
How so?
Well, this isn't just a bunch of isolated individuals going into their private bedrooms and whispering quiet apologies to God. It is a massive, corporate, shared confession. They own their collective failure together.
Which leads directly into the fifth phase, committing themselves.
Having heard, understood, and confessed, the people make a solemn, formal, written covenant to change their ways. They literally put their names on a document.
And finally, the sixth phase, living it out together. The ultimate result of this rigorous process isn't just a brief emotional catharsis that fades by Monday morning.
No, it's a fundamentally reordered communal life, marked by tangible faithfulness in how they handle money, marriage, and worship, and it results in immense, overwhelming joy.
When you look at the architecture of that Nehemiah model, you see how incredibly deliberate and structural the process of true renewal is. It leaves no room for shortcuts.
You know what this entire process deeply reminds me of?
What's that?
It's exactly like the medical process of physical therapy after you suffer a catastrophic bone break. Say you are skiing, you crash, and you completely shatter your femur.
Ouch. Yeah.
Right. You are in agony. You cannot just take a heavy painkiller, feel a quick pang of regret about skiing too fast, and magically expect to run a marathon the next day.
The painkiller just masks the reality of the break.
Exactly. To actually heal, you have to go through a grueling structural process. First, you have to face the diagnostic reality. You have to look at the x-ray with the surgeon. You have to clearly see the jagged, broken bone.
Oh, that is exactly like hearing and understanding the word in Nehemiah. The law is the x-ray showing you the internal break.
Yeah, the x-ray doesn't care about your feelings. It just shows the truth and what happens next.
Next comes the pain.
Having a major bone medically set or doing those initial physical therapy sessions hurts immensely. You weep. You cry out. You feel the profound, inescapable reality of the brokenness, just like the Israelites weeping when they realize how broken their covenant relationship is.
That's the feeling the need phase.
Then you have to commit to the grueling, daily, monotonous exercises. You have to consciously choose to do the hard work of healing, even when it's uncomfortable. That's the confession and the commitment.
And finally, after months of that communal effort, working with your doctors, your physical therapists, your family supporting you, the bone knits back together.
You can walk again. You live it out. But you cannot skip the x-ray and you cannot skip the physical therapy and expect to walk.
What your physical therapy analogy captures so perfectly is the mechanism of healing. It proves that this process must be deeply structural.
It's not a quick fix.
No, and what this analysis emphasizes over and over is that the Nehemiah model is deeply communal and profoundly liturgical.
Let's define liturgical here, because people might just picture high church priests in robes swinging incense. What does liturgical mean in the context of community renewal?
In this context, liturgical refers to the structured, repeated rhythms and practices that shape a community's heart and mind over time. It's the physical therapy exercises.
So it's not a one-time event.
No, it isn't a quick spiritual event or a manufactured emotional high, like a weekend youth retreat where everyone gets fired up, crawls around a campfire, and then completely forgets everything by Tuesday afternoon because there was no structure to hold the emotion.
Right, because the feeling fades.
Chris R. Velazquez calls the Nehemiah moment a profound reconstitution of people under God's word.
Yeah.
You are literally resetting the bone. You are rebuilding the entire socio-spiritual structure of the community around a shared objective truth rather than a fleeting shared feeling.
That distinction between objective truth and shared feeling is huge. So bringing this down to the ground level, what does this all mean for the listener?
The practical application.
Exactly. We have discussed the grand biblical history spanning millennia. We have unpacked the powerful, surgical precision of the Nehemiah model. But how does this theology actually translate into daily life, into the mundane realities of a Tuesday morning?
The material actually breaks down exact practical implications for different spheres of life.
And I want to zoom in on a few of these because they are incredibly challenging.
The framework divides these practical implications into several distinct categories, for the individual, for churches, for families, and for leaders.
Let's start with the individual.
For the individual, the analysis points out that the primary ever-present danger is simply spiritual forgetfulness, the drift. The prescribed remedy is not to try to invent a new spiritual practice, but to rehearse this received identity constantly.
How do you do that?
You do this through the rhythms of prayer, deep engagement with Scripture, and regular confession. It's reminding yourself of the X-ray and the healing.
Okay, what about for churches?
For churches, there is a very stark warning. Shared attendance in a building does not equal shared covenant identity.
Oof, that's a gut punch for a lot of megachurches.
It really is.
Yeah.
You can pack a room with thousands of people listening to a great band, but creating a resilient covenant community requires the slow, unglamorous work of deep discipleship and sacrament.
Meaning the tangible, historical practices like communion and baptism that anchor the community in reality, not just in a performance.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? I really want to focus heavily on the mandates for families and for leaders because those two areas struck a massive chord with me when I was reading through this.
Let's look at families first.
The material states that parents must prioritize teaching their children who they are before God rather than just enforcing moral behavior.
Which is how most of us parent.
Yeah.
We just try to manage behavior.
Exactly. I want to explore the psychology of that. Think about a parent dealing with a child throwing a massive tantrum on a Tuesday evening because they have to share a toy.
We've all been there.
If you as a parent are only focused on teaching moral behavior, your reaction is purely behavioral management. You say, don't hit your brother, be nice, sharing is good.
You are essentially just training them to be polite roommates in the social contract.
Right, you are managing the symptoms. But if you take this covenant approach, you are trying to teach them their core identity. You are trying to communicate, you are a beloved part of this family, you are chosen and loved by God, and people who are loved like that do not treat others with cruelty.
The behavior flows from the identity.
The moral behavior becomes a natural, logical outflow of understanding their secure identity rather than a heavy, arbitrary burden of performance they have to carry to avoid punishment. It completely changes the atmospheric pressure of a home.
It fundamentally shifts the foundation of parenting from the law of behavioral compliance to the grace of secure identity.
And when we look at the implications for leaders, whether in a church, a nonprofit, or even a corporate culture trying to build shared values, the warnings are equally profound.
And honestly, they are terrifying.
The material explicitly warns leaders that true renewal cannot ever be manufactured by applying pressure, guilt, or performance metrics. Villesis writes a line that is worth memorizing. Reformation without gospel, renewal becomes moralism. Renewal without truth becomes sentimentality.
Let's stop right there. Reformation without gospel. Renewal becomes moralism. Renewal without truth becomes sentimentality. Break the psychology of that quote down for us. What does that actually look like in a leadership context?
Let's dissect the first half. Reformation without renewal becomes moralism. Think about the intense pressure on a leader in any organization, but especially a religious or mission-driven one.
You desperately want your community to be committed, passionate, and acting rightly.
If you try to achieve that reformation of their behavior by just turning the screws, if you use guilt, shame, fear, or endless task lists without actually renewing their heart-level identity, you end up with moralism.
You create a culture of white-knuckled checklist keeping.
People will conform, yes. They will follow the rules out of fear of standing out. But internally, they will be utterly exhausted, deeply resentful, and spiritually brittle. The moment the pressure is removed, the behavior vanishes.
And the second half. Renewal without truth becomes sentimentality.
That is the opposite trap. If a leader tries to create a profound feeling of renewal simply by hyping people up emotionally, maybe through highly produced music, charismatic speaking, or creating an atmosphere of intense emotional vulnerability, but they completely fail to ground that emotion in the hard, objective, historical truths of the word, like we saw in step 3 of the Nehemiah model, you end up with pure sentimentality.
It feels incredibly warm and fuzzy in the room. Everyone is crying and hugging, but it has absolutely no spine.
It's cotton candy.
It dissolves the instant it touches the moisture of real-world suffering. Leaders are constantly tempted to use either guilt or hype to manufacture commitment, because it works in the short term.
But ultimately, both methods create incredibly fragile, hollow communities. True leadership, according to this covenant model, requires the immense patience to simply create space for repentance, to teach the truth clearly, and to rely entirely on the Spirit to change hearts, rather than relying on your own charismatic ability to pressure people.
And when a leader actually has the courage to lead that way, the material shows us the incredible fruits of this renewed identity.
A community built this way experiences a deep, unshakable assurance of God's love. They display shocking courage when trials or exiles come because their identity isn't tied to their comfort.
They experience profound unity, and their mission actually has clarity and world-changing power.
It is the absolute difference between a community that is barely surviving on life support and one that is truly, vibrantly alive.
But as with any incredibly powerful dynamic, there are always hidden traps. The human heart is a factory of idols. And the analysis we're exploring is very careful to outline several specific, highly seductive dangers that a community must actively avoid as they pursue this vision of renewal.
Let's dive into these dangers because they are landmines. The material lists several common misunderstandings that can derail the whole process.
One danger is self-generated identity, which we discussed heavily earlier, falling back into the modern cultural obsession with self-invention and branding.
Another is separating identity from obedience, which is the fatal trap of thinking that because grace is free, it's just a blank check for immorality, completely ignoring the summons.
A third danger is emotion-driven renewal without truth, which we just dissected regarding leadership, believing that intense feelings are somehow deeper or more authentic than objective truth.
And another critical warning is forgetting Christ at the center. The author warns that if the renewal process becomes about anything other than Christ's finished work, it inevitably devolves into rigid legalism or, worse, ethnic pride.
But there is one danger in particular that I really want to push back on and explore deeply: religious nostalgia.
Seeking the past instead of God's truth today. Right now, in our broader culture, nostalgia isn't just a feeling, it is a massive, multi-billion-dollar industry.
Oh, it absolutely is. It dominates everything.
Whether it's Hollywood pumping out endless reboots of 90s movies, or political campaigns built entirely on slogans about returning to some imagined golden age, or churches desperately longing for the revival days and cultural dominance they had 50 years ago, nostalgia is everywhere.
It is the air we breathe. It is incredibly tempting to look backwards when the present feels chaotic.
But the analysis makes this brilliant, cutting distinction. I want to read the exact quote. Nostalgia seeks comfort in memory. Covenant renewal seeks faithfulness in the present.
This raises an important question.
I need you to break down the mechanism here. How can a community actually tell the difference between rightfully remembering our historical foundations, which, as we discussed earlier, the text says we absolutely must do to avoid apostasy, and just lazily idolizing the good old days? Where is the line between memory and nostalgia?
That is perhaps the most vital question a community can ask itself today, and it is a subtle psychological distinction, but a completely fatal one if misunderstood.
Lay it out for us.
It comes down to the object and the goal of the remembering. Nostalgia is, at its absolute core, fundamentally self-centered. When we feel nostalgic, what we are really longing for is the way we felt in the past.
We are longing for a specific era when things felt simpler to us, when our specific demographic or culture had more societal power, or when we simply felt more comfortable and secure.
Nostalgia is an idolization of our own past experiences and our own past dominance.
It's wanting to go back to the home stadium where we always won.
Exactly. It's worshiping the uniform again. Covenant memory, on the other hand, is entirely and ruthlessly God-centered.
Okay, contrast that for us.
Think back to the Old Testament. When the nation of Israel was commanded by God to constantly remember the exodus from Egypt, they absolutely weren't supposed to get nostalgic about how great the manna tasted in the wilderness.
Or how exciting it was to see the Red Sea part.
Right. They were commanded to remember what God did, his specific actions of rescue and faithfulness, in order to fuel their courage and obedience to him in the chaotic present. Memory is a tool to propel you forward. Nostalgia is a drug that keeps you anesthetized in the past.
So nostalgia paralyzes you in an idealized past that probably never really existed, while covenant memory propels you into the gritty reality of the present.
That is the exact mechanism, and this connects directly to the danger of forgetting Christ at the center. If Christ isn't at the absolute center of your memory, the community rapidly devolves.
In what way?
Think about it. If a church is just remembering its own cultural heritage, Remember how great our programs were in the 1980s? Remember when everyone in town respected us? You end up with what theologians call ethnic particularism.
Let's define ethnic particularism for the listener.
Ethnic particularism is the toxic, arrogant belief that your specific cultural expression, your specific racial group, or your specific historical era is inherently superior and is the ultimate true expression of the kingdom of God.
It's when a group believes God belongs exclusively to them and their way of doing things.
Nostalgia breeds this perfectly. It makes you exclusionary. Or, alternatively, nostalgia breeds rigid legalism, where a community tries to perfectly, meticulously recreate the exact societal rules and aesthetics of 1950 or 1850 or whenever their imagined golden age was, believing that returning to those rules will save them.
True covenant renewal aggressively rejects both of those traps.
It remembers Christ's past actions of redemption specifically to give us unshakable hope for the future so that we can live radically faithfully right now, today, regardless of whether the present moment feels comfortable or whether it feels like we are living in exile in Babylon.
That distinction is incredibly clarifying. Nostalgia is about desperately seeking our own comfort. Covenant memory is about courageously seeking faithfulness.
That's the perfect summary.
Well, looking back over this journey, we have covered an immense, staggering amount of ground today. We started in the slow, diagnostic, muddy waters of community drift and the tragedy of the roommate marriage.
We traced the epic cosmic timeline of humanity's attempt at autonomous identity in the fall, the catastrophic but necessary severe mercy of the exile, and the ultimate restoration.
We unpacked the surgical, step-by-step precision of the Nehemiah model, the X-ray, and the physical therapy of renewal.
We looked at the profound mandates for parents dealing with Tuesday tantrums, the deep psychological traps of moralism and sentimentality for leaders, and the incredibly seductive danger of paralyzing ourselves with nostalgia.
It is a vast landscape, but through it all, the central, unifying, gravitational theme remains completely constant. True identity precedes behavior, and that identity is something we are invited to receive, not a resume we have to earn.
The analysis concludes by stating beautifully that this entire agonizing historical journey ultimately brings God's people back to one simple, profound, central confession found in the book of Isaiah chapter 43, verse 1.
It is God speaking, and he simply says, "You are mine, and I am yours."
You are mine, and I am yours. It really ultimately all comes down to that single declaration.
And for you, listening to this deep dive right now, whether you are driving or working or just sitting at home, the profound, life-altering takeaway here is that you are personally invited into this exact reality.
True identity isn't something you have to exhaustively build from scratch.
It isn't a digital avatar you have to constantly curate. It isn't a personal brand you have to market to the world to justify your existence. It is a secure, unshakable reality that you are simply invited to receive from the Creator, who looks at you and says, "You are mine."
It is, without a doubt, the ultimate, most profound relief from the crushing modern burden of self-invention.
Absolutely. It is the deep breath the world is desperate for. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own as you go about your week.
Something to keep the gears turning.
Exactly. We've established extensively today, based on all these historical sources and sociological models, that covenant identity is fundamentally, non-negotiably communal.
It requires us to be deeply physically woven into a shared people.
It requires weeping together, confessing together, and rejoicing together in real time in physical space, just as the Israelites did in the dirt of Jerusalem in Nehemiah chapter 8. So my question for you is this. What happens to this profound covenant identity in our increasingly digital, algorithmically isolated world?
That is a challenging question.
Can we ever truly experience the visceral, life-changing power of a renewed, shared covenant identity through a glowing screen and a chat box? Or does true biblical belonging ultimately demand that we radically, uncomfortably reclaim physical, embodied presence with one another? Let that marinate.